You found the Backup Wrap-Up, your go-to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. In this episode, we talk about my recent trip to San Diego, where I already live, but it was for Veeamon 2025. We break down all the Veeamon announcements that matter to folks like yourself. I walk through the big security announcement, including their CrowdStrike integration and the data resilience maturity model that they developed with McKinsey. Very interesting. But the thing that got me really excited, Veeam finally did what many of us have been begging them to do for years, create a Linux-based software appliance that'll make your backup servers way more secure against things like ransomware. Plus, I talk about their AI integration with Anthropic that lets you basically talk to your backups. If you've ever used ChatGPT, imagine doing that, but with your backups. This is huge, interesting stuff. Hope you like it. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about backup and recovery for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that we had no backups of the production database that we had just lost. I don't want that to happen to you, and that's why I do this. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. Hi, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I have with me my robot vacuum advisor persona, Molly Yondi. How's it going, persona?
I'm good, Curtis. And how are your two robot vacuums doing?
You know what? I was just commenting today that they are actually really nice and doing really, really well. I just, because we have tenants, right, that are renting different rooms, and today, for the first time since sort of mapping out everything, I let it, because we had a tenant move out yesterday, so I let it go into the tenant's room, and I wasn't sure how to map that additional area, and all I did was tell it to. I opened up the door and I just said to do a full vacuum, and it was like, oh, look, there's this new room,
Yeah.
and it went in there, it mapped it out, and then it marked it as a new room. So then I created a new room for that room. And then I created a routine that is a 3x pass in that room, right? So that I can, like, when it's a tenant is moved out. So then I'm like, hey, send it in there and go in there in 3 times, because it's only like 120 square feet. So, or something like that. And yeah, anyway. So
I can't believe before this you were thinking of using a non-smart robot that you had to actually control with a remote, like a physical remote.
It was smart. It just wasn't that smart.
I have no idea what you were even thinking, Curtis. Just
I was thinking cost.
I guess that's
right?
true. Yes, Roombas
Remember,
are expensive.
we had the Roomba. The Roomba that we had was one with it sucks up it has the bag and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that thing was like $800. I'm like, I'm not spending another $800. But I had no idea that I could get one this good. It was also on sale, right? It was like $160, something like that.
Yep.
That other thing was like $150. And I just,
and it got
but
stuck.
it didn't. Yeah, it got stuck all the time. Like literally, it didn't finish a single pass, either upstairs or downstairs. It didn't finish a single pass without some catastrophic thing happening. And the whole point of these things are that they're just supposed to do what they're supposed to do without bothering me.
Yeah.
Right? It might not be the best vacuum, right? But it's supposed to just happen.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not supposed to have to come home and have it, on its back.
Like a turtle.
Exactly. And that just kept happening, and you're like, and it would climb stuff that you're like, why are you climbing? That's clearly like the base of a fan, right? It would see the fan. Well, this is the problem, is it doesn't see it. It just uses, it doesn't use LiDAR. It used, what was the other?
Oh, IR.
Yeah, yeah, it uses IR sensing, and I guess it doesn't see the fan, so it just drives right up on the fan base, and then I'd come in there, and the thing would be like beached up on the fan base, or try to go under the couch, and it would go under the couch, and it would just get stuck there, just
Yeah.
get stuck going. Oh Lord, what a mess.
Well, I'm glad
Anyway,
at least that it's been working well and you
been
haven't had
very,
any major issues.
yeah, yeah, it's been working very well, and it works well with like these other rooms that are shut off that I can then say, hey, the tenants moved out, send
Yeah.
them in there. Yeah. But anyway, so I continue to list you as my robot vacuum advisor. But I thought we could do a quick review of the conference that I just went to. I just went to Veeamon, which is Veeam's annual conference, and this is my first one that I went to since before joining Druva, right? So I went. The last one I went to was many moons ago, and it was in New Orleans. This one was a little bit closer, which is it was in San Diego, so
Hmm.
which is like 40 minutes from where I live, and it was nice to go there and to see the things that they were announcing. To again, get some face to face with some of the people that we've had on the show, right, and to make some new friends as well, and to also experience San Diego as a tourist was kind of interesting.
So this was in San Diego, right? In a giant convention center. Were there customers there in addition to and analysts, I'm guessing? Like who was there?
Yeah, so there were analysts and press, and I was in that section. They cordoned us off. They gave us like a nice front row seat with tables, so that we could use our laptops and things like that during the presentation. And there were I don't know how many people were there. It's not a conference that's like the size of. I mean, this does not compare to reInvent, right? reInvent is like just
Ginormous.
ginormous. It's like a billion people. It's like uh, I think it's up to like 60, 70,000 people. This was
Yeah.
not like that. This was a much more intimate event, but it was still measured in the thousands. I don't know what the actual number was, and it's a very big stage, very big presentation, very they had a nice intro video each day. It was very professionally produced, which is all very nice. They took care of us as analysts and press to make sure
So
that we didn't starve to death and all of that.
so this is a sponsored event that you attended, right? They did pay
Right.
for your hotel and your
Right.
meals and
Correct.
visiting. But everything we're talking about for the rest of this episode is your opinions, right? In terms of
Yes.
what you're going to be
Yes.
talking, what we will be
Right.
discussing.
Yeah. This is not a sponsored episode. Veeam is not paying for these words, nor anybody else paying for these words. And yeah, this is just my thoughts.
Okay.
And it is interesting because, preparing for the show, we looked at some of the coverage of the show, and it is interesting the what do you call it the perspective that other people had when they're covering the show
Yeah.
versus my perspective. And the one thing I walked away with that I was super excited about, that what was interesting, that they didn't even talk about. So
Yeah.
we'll talk about it.
We'll
I
get.
think we should cover that last. What
Yeah.
do you think?
I think that sounds good.
That makes sense for
So
you.
what would you say was like your one big takeaway, or what was the one message that they were trying to ensure everyone walked away with from the conference?
The one message was that they heard it loud and clear, the need for strong security and defense against ransomware.
Hmm.
Right, there were a number of features that talked about that. There's the CrowdStrike integration. There's the ransomware trends and report. They have the data resilience maturity model. We'll talk about that in a minute. And it's just a topic, just like, I mean, just like all the other the backup vendors, right?
Yeah,
They
it's what's
all
top of
want to
mind.
make sure that it's top of mind, right?
Yeah.
And so they wanted to make sure that message has been received, and we are doing all of these things. You know, previous shows that I've seen, it's like the big announcements are we're covering this new platform or we have this new thing, and they had some of those things, but the things that they led with were the cybersecurity message, you know, and some really big stuff that it fell into that category.
So just given that it's the flavor of the year, I guess, and a conference will not be a conference unless it's being discussed. Was there anything around AI?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. AI came up, and actually a really cool demo that we'll talk about in a second. I, actually, the one AI thing that they talked about and then demonstrated, it was something that we've talked about for many, many years, and I actually got to see it happen, even though what they're demoing was like days old.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
So maybe let's just dive into it. Do you want to start with the security side of announcements first?
Yeah. So that there was this integration with CrowdStrike, to basically help to again identify and hunt out and find ransomware and various other threats that I liked a lot.
Just
Don't want to delve too much into that, but that
Yeah.
was go ahead.
But before you move on though, I know you don't want to talk a lot. It's interesting though, right? It just seems so obvious to us just having been in the backup in space
Right.
forever, right? It's like, oh, you have all your data there. Why wouldn't you want to look for ransomware in that treasure
Right.
trove of data? And
Right.
yet we're starting to see like all the backup vendors now doing integrations with CrowdStrike, with Veeam
Hmm.
being the latest with their announcement.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and they've had some similar features, but this is a solid integration with CrowdStrike. So yeah. Um, but they also released this ransomware trends report, and this I don't want to go into the different percentages and stuff, but basically it showed their continued efforts in this area, right, to help people understand just how big the ransomware problem is, and just how, um, in case you were the one dentist out of the five dentists that doesn't recommend sugarless gum for their patients to chew gum, um, the that was a dentine reference for those that didn't get that reference anyway. Uh, that they drove that message home loud and clear.
Yeah.
That this is continues to be a problem. They showed things like the percentage of people that paid the ransom, the percentage of people that paid the ransom but still didn't get their data back. All of those interesting things. I think every one of these reports, they're always very interested.
Yeah.
The
And I think for someone who maybe you're a Veeam customer, maybe you're not a Veeam customer, you should go grab that report and take a look at it because it could help you as you're trying to explain to your bosses or the head of IT, hey, we need extra funding because there is risk in our environment. And look, even these other companies that thought they were protected were not. And so I think having actual data that you can then take and talk to other people, be it on the business side or wherever else, right, I think is helpful just having a larger sample set.
Yeah, agreed. And speaking of things that you can go get and aren't specifically tailored at Veeam customers, there is this data resilience maturity model. This was actually really impressive. They worked with McKinsey, which is a big consulting firm, for those of you that don't know who they are, and also with a professor at MIT. And they interviewed, I forgot what the actual number was, but quite, you know, it was either I should have the number here. I should have the number in front of me, but it was quite a large number of CIOs, and they talked to them about the various things that they were doing from a data resiliency standpoint. And what they then did was they modeled that out into a maturity model, and then they were able to show you these are the things. If you're doing these things, then you are, and only these things, then you are at the very basic level of maturity. It's like, you're making backups, you're making copies of those backups, things like that. Um, and then that's like the most basic. It's like table
You're doing
stakes.
your job.
You're making copies, and but then as you started to add things like um, immutability, add things like uh, uh, the incident response plans, and as you added all of these additional things, whether or not you were doing, they have the concept of the 32110. Are you doing these things? But they didn't use that specific term because, again, they weren't catering this specifically to Veeam audiences. But are you making sure that you have an immutable copy? Is it offsite, or and are you doing tabletop discussions? Are you doing recovery testing? Are you doing automated recovery testing? As you worked your way up the resiliency, model, you could see that basically anyone can look at this model and say, here's where I am. And again, this is another tool that you can use when working with senior people in your organization. You can say, look, Veeam came out with this maturity model, and we are like the most basic. I've been trying to tell you, we got to get better, right? And it's something that you can use to basically make yourselves better and more resilient against things like cyber attacks.
Yeah. And I think I also like the resiliency model and, like you said, laying out those levels, because you could then decide and say, look, we might be at basic to get to intermediate or whatever the next step is. Here are the things we need to cover, rather than,
Right.
hey, let's just start randomly adding things from like the advanced category, right? Which
Yeah.
may not even, it doesn't help you in the long term, right? Because you don't have the things you need to cover the next level. So it gives you a way to sort of structure and organize your thoughts.
Do the table stakes, add things as you can, make yourself better over time.
Yeah.
But um, they talked about how that they now have Microsoft Entra ID support with the Veeam Data Cloud, which, if you're not familiar with the Veeam Data Cloud, they went from not doing this at all to boom,
So
doing it for a lot of things. And so they now basically have a SaaS based, um, backup product for a number of products. Here's an interesting stat that I picked up from the Veeamon conference, and that was, again, it's a stat that I have not verified, but it's a stat that they said multiple times with the guy from Microsoft standing on the stage. So what they claimed to be was the largest provider of backup from Microsoft 365. And
interesting.
they actually gave a number. And if I recall correctly, it was something like 20% of all Microsoft 365 backup customers are using their product, right? Not just 25% of the people that are backing up Microsoft 365, but it was 20 or 25% of the entire Microsoft 365 customer
That's
base is using the Veeam Data Cloud to back up Microsoft
that's
365.
crazy. That is
Yeah,
huge.
especially considering that they were actually kind of a late entry in
Yeah.
this market, right? The fact that they've garnered such a big market share is a big thing. Also, by the way, I just extrapolated from that. I remember there was a time when if you did a survey of Microsoft 365 customers, we came out with a number that said that like only 5% of 365 customers were backing up 365. So that number has clearly been increased, because if they're doing 20 to 25%, and there are other people that are doing it, so that
Maybe,
that that's good news to me.
maybe everyone listens to our podcast, because I know we always
That's what
talk
it is.
about backup
It,
Microsoft
totally
365,
our podcast.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think we should take claim for that.
And to the Veeam Data Cloud, they added support for Microsoft Entra ID, so otherwise known or formerly known as Active Directory. So they also added Veeam CDP for Windows and Linux. That was something that, the idea of basically being able to back up the data every few seconds. for
CDP
certain
meaning
workloads. What's that? Go ahead. Oh, thank
CDP.
you. Thank you. CDP meaning continuous data protection. And then there was another announcement, which I was very excited about. What they demonstrated was if you're using Veeam Vault, right? So first off, what is Veeam Vault? Veeam Vault is their cloud storage in Azure, and basically you buy the gigabyte. And if you're using the Veeam Cloud, that you could recover any image-based backup. So a backup of a Windows server, a Linux server, any image-based backup, you can boot up that system in Azure in under 5 minutes. And that was really impressive, right? Now, and I'll add to this, you don't necessarily have to use Veeam Vault. You can do this by using, for example, Azure Storage. You can even do it by having it somewhere else. They're just saying, they were demonstrating the power of what they have there. And if you use something else, you would also have things like egress charges, right? But if you used Veeam Vault and you did a recovery into Azure, you would be able to do this per server in under 5 minutes. Pretty darn impressive.
Yeah. No, that is. And so when they're doing this recovery, is that being instantiated in the customer's original source location or in their Microsoft account or
the latter? So
okay.
they're in their Microsoft account in Azure.
Okay.
Right. Now, again, remember, Veeam, due to their relationships with Microsoft, they generally do a lot of things in Azure, right? So they're doing their Veeam Data Cloud in Azure. They're doing the Veeam Vault in Azure, and they're doing this in Azure, right? So you're able to, and they are able to do recoveries in other cloud platforms. It's just this is what they're leading with.
Yeah. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. So we have two more things to talk about. The first is this AI piece, which I just thought was just super cool. And then we're going to talk about something that, like, literally we've been begging them to do for years and that they finally did. So the first was that they have an integration with Anthropic. Anthropic, for those that don't know, is the company behind Claude, right? Which is a big LLM, large language model, and a product that I've used quite a bit. And they demoed it. I knew that they were working on it, and so they announced it. But you know how it is with announcements. I didn't know how real it was. I got to watch them. They connected it to a demo backup environment, and then they had two sort of AI integrations. One was a natural language search where they could say things like, show me all of the, as I recall, there were some like reports on weather, something about weather. They said, show me weather reports in 2024 or whatever. And then they pulled them up, and the result of that search was kind of like, it was very Google-like, where you had a heading of a document, then you had like a summary of the document, and you could click on it and be taken directly to that. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about searching the backups, all of your Veeam backups that the Veeam catalog knows about. You're talking about searching them using natural language, and then pulling up searching the content. This is really important. Searching the content of these backups, because that is not typically something that you do with a backup product, right? This is one of the differences between archive and backup, right? Is that with backup, we generally just know the server, the file name, date and time.
Yeah.
We don't generally know the contents of the file. But due to this integration, you can search the contents of the file. So they're like, show me files that are about weather reports in 2024, and it's like, boop, here you go. It's like Googling your backups, which was really cool.
That is actually pretty awesome. And one of the things, as you were talking through this, that ran through my head was, what does this mean for vendors who do e-discovery?
Huge.
like Xterra or
Yeah.
Disco or take your pick, right?
Yeah, it's huge. And by the way, this is only the first of the
Yeah.
two things we're going to talk about, right? So what they did next was like, it was just like, and for those of you, if you ever haven't, if you haven't ever used ChatGPT or Claude or something similar, you would just be blown away with this, right? Again, having used both tools, what they're really good at, they're good at a lot of things, but some of it borders on, you know, like when you ask it to try to come up with something new, quote new, nothing is really new in an LLM. But when you ask it to come up with something new, it can sometimes have what we call hallucinations and make up stories and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But what it's really good at is summarizing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we use that here, right? I use it with the podcast to like create a summary of the podcast. Just read the podcast transcription and create a summary, and it'll like boop, right? That's what it's really great at. So let's take that query,
Mm-hmm.
the previous query that I was talking about. Instead of saying, just show me all of the the weather reports, you can literally say, again, you're connected to my backups. You're looking at the content of all of my files. What can you tell me about weather that, in 2024, based on the information you can find in my backups? I was like,
So,
boop. And
so
then they
basically
create a
summarize it.
summary. Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, like how many times, how many years have we talked about this? The
So,
idea of leveraging your existing backup data for this kind of concept.
so here's my question though.
Yeah.
Do you think that they need to fine tune it more for the backup case? Because, as an example, say you said, tell me about my weather in 2024, and it provides you that summary. It's probably going to give you a summary based on the content, right?
Yeah.
97% of the time, it was sunny in San Diego, right? With temperatures between 60 and 72.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus maybe as a backup case or a security case or an e-discovery case, you're like, how often did this report get published? Or how often, like basically something from either like the file creation perspective or...
It would be able to do all that.
Yeah.
Right. Basically, the point is that it's connecting the LLM, right, the Anthropic MCP to all of your backup data. And then you're able to then do all of the things that you think of Claude doing, but using your backup data as the source, right? So you can basically, it pulled up a window that looked just like Claude, and you type things, right? So if you wanted to say, how many times did I publish a report? How many times did I use the word sunny in my report? All of those things would be available.
So
and it was
I'm gonna play what was the person who hates technology? What's that person called?
The Luddite.
Thank you. I'm gonna play the Luddite.
Okay.
Right. This all sounds awesome, Curtis.
Yeah.
However, as a backup / security person, we always talk about backups being your source of last resort, right? That is like your last line of defense.
Yeah.
And so you are now providing access, which how knows how the access is done, right? To this vast trove of data, which depending on how secure or insecure someone configures it, may make it easier for people to exfiltrate data, understand everything that's going on. How do you ensure that I don't get to see Curtis's weather report or what he has been talking to about me?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I think all these things now need to be thought through. So
I had that exact conversation with Rick Vanover, right? And I thought his answer was great, right? First off, he's like, this is just development and testing right now. No customers' data is being openly thing, right? He also said it is definitely, the design is you're not handing your data over to Claude or to Anthropic for training on anybody else's. That's like number one. And he understood that they need basically the AI equivalent of a privacy statement.
Yep.
here are the data flows. Here's where your data goes. Here's where your data doesn't go. Here are the things. I'm going to assume, but you can never assume, and you got to double check and all this stuff. I would assume that basically that you don't need to do anything additional to protect this, that you just need to make sure that you're securing your Veeam environment in the same way that you're supposed to be securing the rest of your Veeam environment. Does that make sense?
It does, but then it's also the question of like, eventually people are going to want self-service, right? And so how do you ensure that access controls are honored, as an example?
Yeah, I mean, you got to do all that, right? But
It's still cool. Don't take it the wrong way, right? I think it's
yeah.
awesome because they're able to expose it, but I think now it's like, okay, how do you build all those other controls that are needed in order to make sure it's being done in the right way?
And they've got to do that, and they've got to publish what those controls are, and all of that stuff. Yeah. So, and the good news was they already know that, and they're going to do all that stuff. So, but now let's talk about what I thought.
And that is the end of the episode. Thank you all for listening. We will talk to you later. That is a wrap.
Are you ready? So it's funny. I led with and talked mainly about one particular topic that they covered in the show that the other articles that I read didn't even cover at all. They didn't even mention it, let alone like mention it. My main thing was this topic, and we're going to finish with it here. And that was that Veeam finally did something that so many of us have been asking for. And I also, heard, from Anton Gostav, I'm totally mispronouncing, I'm sure his last name, Gostav, that this is something he's been wanting, right? And so back before I was at Druva, I remember meeting with Veeam, and I said that, the ransomware thing is only getting worse. And this is almost 10 years ago. The ransomware is only going to get worse. And that I was very concerned about the fact that they were 100% based on Windows, and that was their Achilles heel, and that they really needed to have a Linux version of the product. And many of us weren't really sure that was ever going to happen due to their relationship with Windows or with Microsoft.
Yeah. But in their to their credit, right?
Yeah.
They have been working towards some of that, right? So like they have proxies that now run. I know if you've listened to some of our past podcasts where we had Dave and also Rick on, right? They did also launch their Linux hardened repository, right? So you could already start to see them, but it wasn't everything, right? And
it wasn't the main backup server, right? You had the hardened repository was a separate, but it's a target to back up to, right? But not the main, but, because basically it's like you needed pieces that just simply weren't available in Windows. I'm sorry, in Linux. And they did actually announce that they were going to do this at last Veeamon. They did announce that this was coming, and it's now a reality, but that wasn't actually the full announcement. What they heard from their customers was, we like this idea from a security standpoint of not having the backup server run the same operating system that everybody is attacking. But we also don't know Linux. And if you don't know Linux, adding Linux into your environment is actually a bad idea. As much as I like Linux and Unix, if you don't know how to properly secure it, it's a bad idea. And so this is the big announcement, is that they have a software appliance. Now, what is a software appliance? It's either a VM image or an ISO that you can load onto a physical piece of hardware that basically comes up as a fully functional backup server. And they are using the concept of the paradigm of just enough operating system, JEOS, which you can Google that and realize what that is. And basically they disable or remove everything about the operating system that is not necessary to do the job. And all you have to do, what's that?
Reduce the attack vectors, right?
Reduce the attack, the attack surface, and also what they did is they everything that did stay, they configure it in the most secure way possible, and they pre-configure it for you. One of the things, for example, that is required and you literally cannot not do it is automatic security updates. Yes, right? You can do automatic. You can also do automatic feature updates, but they separate between those two.
Yeah.
And that is huge, right? So and they drew a an analogy between they talked about an Android phone. An Android phone runs Linux, and they said you don't need to know Linux to run this appliance any more than you need to know Linux to run your Android phone.
Yeah. You hide
Yeah.
all the complexities. It's like user doesn't care about that, and you do a great job of securing it versus letting the admins decide what they should or should not do and end up with issues.
Yeah, and they demoed this. It was hard to see sometimes what was version 13 and what was this appliance, but they demoed version 13 and the appliance like at the same time. And so one of the things, for example, was that they have greatly increased the granularity of role-based administration controls. And so you could, for example, you can say this person is only allowed to do restores, but they're only allowed to do restores back to the original location. Or for an additional level of risk but functionality, they can restore to these predefined locations. So they're allowed to restore to something else, but only something else that I
Have defined.
have defined and ordained, right? And then what I really liked was no one gets root, right? No one gets root. That's because if you have root, you can do just about anything, right? And so I really liked the idea that they did, and I said, and so I actually met the actual person who, he's like, this was my baby, right? I talked to him, and I was like, dude, it's Linux. Someone has root, right? Root exists, like UID 0. So are you saying like Veeam admin? It's not root, but it's UID 0. That's root. He's like, no, that's not what we're talking about. He's like, literally, you don't get the password. Right. Root obviously does exist. And they have they don't want you to ever have to touch Linux. So what they do is, but if you do really, really need to touch Linux, they have a facility to do that, but they have a completely separate security person who has to approve you having root for a period of time.
So it's like a break glass situation.
Yeah, it's like a break glass situation. And I do, because like one of the things that you can do if you have root is you can turn off the immutability feature that they are using, right? So you wouldn't want that to be available. I'm going to assume that is then in a like sudo environment, which then would be completely logged, and everything that you do is logged. And so they're designing it so that you wouldn't ever have to do that, right? And this is like it's in beta now. And so it is real, and they're controlling the beta via their sales process because they want feedback, right?
That makes sense.
And I verified that this was a fully functioning, everything that Veeam is, with caveats. They're like, well, there are certain things that you cannot do in Linux. One of them talked about was like, I believe one of them was like a live restore to a Windows environment. Like there's components that you need to do that. By the way, speaking of components, they mentioned that one of the reasons that this was made possible was the porting of .NET to Linux. So this is not actually an entirely new code base. This is a code base. I'm sure that they did some changes, but it's essentially the same code as what they're running on the Windows side, but that they're then, they tweaked it a little bit to run in this environment.
Which is good because then you get all the security patches, right?
Yeah.
You get all the updates, and rather than something that's like, is it really going to get the same love and attention as their core area?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's great. So I was super excited by this functionality, and got to see it demoed. And it was interesting when Anton came out on the stage to introduce it. He started out saying, I'm about to talk about something that I'm so excited about, I might get emotional. right? He goes, I've been trying to do this for many years, and he's now able to finally do it. I just think this is huge. And I think, like we talked about before, we had Blocky for Veeam on here, and I said every Veeam customer should put this on their box, right? And Blocky's not telling me to say that, but every Windows-based Veeam customer needs Blocky for Veeam. Anyway, okay, it stops all writes to the file system that aren't done by Veeam.
Yeah.
Like, how awesome is that, right? And it's the only product that's like that. It's the only ransomware preventing product that you can install on the Veeam backup server. And I'm now saying, if you really want to do security right, do this. As soon as this is available, replace all of your as much as you can of your Veeam infrastructure with this new appliance.
Do you know if they mentioned anything about a migration path for those customers that may today be using the Windows-based Veeam backup server, moving over to the Linux-based software appliance?
That's a great question. I did not ask that question.
I'm sure they're thinking of it though. Right?
Where were you? Well, I will say that I made the same statement to them. I was talking with Dave Russell, and I was just with him, and I spoke privately also to Anton about, dude, I'm super excited about this. This is so awesome. I'm so excited. Like, it was funny. Like, even to them, this wasn't what they were leading with. To me, I was like, it was the only thing I was care. I want to talk about this, and I'm super excited about it. And I made that comment about, like, I think they seem to think that where it will primarily take off is in the new customer acquisition and the MSPs and these kind of things, because vendors will be able to package it right and sell it as an actual appliance, and so they but when I said I think every Veeam customer should make this thing, they didn't say, we're not ready to do that or anything like that. So I'm assuming they have a plan. I just forgot to ask them about it.
Yeah. No, this is awesome. I think it's going to make a huge difference. And hopefully we'll stop hearing so much about ransomware gangs attacking backup servers as much.
Yeah.
So I know you mentioned, Curtis, the other partners can now integrate. So one of the announcements that came out was they had Scality made an announcement that they've now shipping an appliance, a hardware appliance, where they can take their Scality object storage plus add in the Veeam backup server and package it all into one box for customers who want something simple and ease of use.
Yeah. And so that leverages this appliance, right? The software appliance. And I think that's great, right? Because, as you know, I'm a big fan of object-based storage for backups. Yeah. I like this idea. Go ahead.
Yeah. And it is interesting because I think it gives them something to compete with the Cohesities and the Rubrics of the world.
I think it very much does. Yeah, exactly. Especially, Scality would be the one, I guess, directly competing at that point. But yeah, Scality and Veeam together, right? Yeah. And this is, I'm sure this is one, I know they hinted at some other vendors that would be coming out. I'm sure that this is one of many vendors that are gonna do that.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was a pretty big show. And it was so hard for me to get there and back. But
oh, Curtis.
Yeah, it was nice to be able to drive to a trade show. All right, well, thanks for letting me chat about Veeamon 2025.
No, thank you for giving us that update and for catching stories that may not have been covered in the other articles. So
absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for our listeners. You're why we do this. That is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.